Good morning and welcome to Tanya chapter 37 today, as we take on a beautiful analysis of the deep meaning, the deeper impact behind our mitzvahs. Now, we may have been taught by our parents, teachers, Hebrew school, that a mitzvah is a good deed. We may have even been taught that a mitzvah is more than just a good deed, it's actually a religious commandment. But today, chapter 37 of Tanya totally reinvents our perception of a mitzvah, its extraordinary impact upon ourselves, the need, its critical place in fulfilling our purpose in this world. What we're about to learn over the next 30 minutes or so is how a mitzvah is actually vital to fulfilling our mission, our purpose in this world. And without the mitzvah, we're lost. We're like a ship without sails. We're not able to guide and direct our purpose in this world. And the mitzvah is actually the fulfillment of that. To be able to explain this idea, I'd like to just explain, refresh where we're holding in terms of the flow of Tanya. What we've learned in the previous chapter was we introduced the doctrine of Dira B'Tachtonim, the doctrine of God desiring a home specifically in this spiritually dark world, in the lowest of all the worlds. This idea we expanded upon in chapter 36. It's a fundamental concept in Jewish philosophy, and its source is right here in Tanya chapter 36, last week's session. You can review that class at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. That's youtube.com/Jewish Gardens under the Tanya playlist, where you can hear all the previous Tanya classes. There we explained that our souls were sent into this world for a very specific mission. We weren't put here to pay our mortgages, to go on vacation, to pay our bills, or to help old ladies cross the street. We were put into this world for a very specific mission of being builders, making for God a home in this physical world. No ifs, no ands, and no buts. It's that simple, it's that straightforward. God desired a home in a world where he was concealed. For God to be revealed, crowned as God, as King, in a world which is spiritually illuminated, a world where God is revealed, that's really not a big deal. It's like, declaring, without getting political, it's like declaring the king of a country king when everybody knows that he's king. It's like not a big deal. It's really no big achievement. But I guess maybe in terms of the presidential election, maybe it might be a good analogy would be when the opponent makes the concession phone call and says, "I concede the election. You won fair and square. You are now the president of the United States of America." Whenever that other candidate makes that phone call, for the candidate to be recognized as the future president in his own election campaign, that's no big deal. But for the other party to recognize that, that's a big achievement. And that's what's happening in this spiritually dark world. God set the stage of dysfunction, of forces of evil and impurity, what we call klippa, what we call sitra achra, the other side, forces that lead us away from our spiritual mission. Not because God is losing control, but because he set the stage for us to live in a spiritually dark world so that we, through our mission, through our focused, mindful service of God, will be able to create for God a home in this spiritually dark world, what's called the lowest of all the worlds. Why is it the lowest? Because it is in this world where godliness is most concealed. And that was the idea that we developed in Tanya chapter 36. We at least introduced it, in Tanya chapter 36. But it's right here in chapter 37 where we really get into the guts of what it means, specifically how we, in our actions, are able to make for God a home in this world. And that is what we're going to be learning today, is what happens through our mitzvahs. We're going to be understanding why it is that a mitzvah is the vehicle which brings about a home for God in this lowly world. I'd like to welcome Elaine to our Torah study, as well as Rob Berger from Chicago, Terry Zweig from Atlanta, Corey and Bob Wertheimer from Palm Beach Gardens, Marty from New York, Lucy Brown, our nurse here at the front lines of COVID in PGA Boulevard, Alicia from Palm Beach Gardens, and Harvey all the way from Chicago, and everybody else that's listening live and later. I'd like to welcome you to today's very powerful insights of Tanya chapter 37, understanding our mission in this world and how we fulfill it. So just before we can understand this idea of how we are able to create for God a home in this world. By the way, why God desired a home in this world is something which is beyond our ability to fathom. We don't understand why God had this desire, just like when you have a desire. Sometimes you crave chocolate, or you'll crave a certain kind of vacation, and you don't need to explain it to anybody. Somebody asks you, well, why do you want that kind of a drink right now? That person is what you call a nudnik. Leave me alone. Don't bother me. Just bring me the drink. That's what I want right now. I want that particular drink. We say in Kabbalah, afatayva frekman nishkin kashes. On a desire, you don't ask questions. When you have a desire, that's what I want. Leave me alone. I don't even give you any rational explanations as to why I want it this way. This is what I want. This is what I desire. So the same thing with God. When God desires something, it's not something which we need to rationally explain, or he needs to rationally explain. That's what he desired. That's what he wanted. And in this case, God revealed to us that what he desired was a dwelling place in this physical world. And it is our mission. He put us in this world to make that happen. By the way, this is what we do. This is the main theme of the prayers of Rosh Hashanah. Not Yom Kippur, specifically Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah is when we turn to God and we say, God, we ask you to please be crowned as king of the world for one more year. You see, remember, Rosh Hashanah is the birthday of the world. And God creates the world in 1 year contracts. After each year, the contract is up for renewal. And God has to decide if he wants to recreate the world for another year or not. This, by the way, is in addition to the doctrine of perpetual creation, that he creates the world at every single moment in time. Generally speaking, he plans ahead for 1 year only to create the world at every single moment. And it's on Rosh Hashanah that the world is up in the balance. It's a toss-up. Will he or will he not? And it depends upon us, humans, about whether we choose to coronate God as creator of the world, or we neglect him at all and we completely ignore God. That will provoke and inspire God to want to create the world for 1 more year. Will he renew the lease or renew the contract for another year or not? That's effectively what we're doing when we're blowing the shofar. If you remember, we learned this elsewhere. Maybe I learned it with the Bar Mitzvah boys, I can't remember. That the theme of Rosh Hashanah, there's 3 blessings in all of the Rosh Hashanah prayers. 3 blessings. Whilst on a regular weekday we have 18 blessings, on Rosh Hashanah we have 3 blessings, and they are Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. Malchios means prayers of coronation. Zichronos is prayers of remembrances that God should have mercy upon us, his promises to never abandon us. And Shofros would be blessings of shofar. Shofar again is when you crown a king. In biblical times, you would blow the shofar. So too, when we crown God as King of the universe, we blow the shofar. So a major fundamental theme of Rosh Hashanah, 2 out of 3 themes, is shofar coronation and Malchios, which is specifically coronation. And you look in the Rosh Hashanah prayers, you'll notice that it's all about crowning God as King of the universe. Rule over the entire world with your glory. That's what we're trying to do. We're asking God to reveal his reign upon all of the world, right? And that effectively ties in perfectly with the theme of man's purpose in this world, which is to make God a home in this world. Remember, Rosh Hashanah is not technically the birthday of the world, it's the birthday of man. It's the 6th day of creation. And it was on the 6th day of creation that man and Adam and Eve were created, because the world without Adam and Eve would be pointless. There'd be no purpose in celebrating the birthday of the world on the first day of creation. The birthday of the world is celebrated on the sixth day of creation, on the creation of Adam and Eve, because without man and woman, the world has no purpose. Why? Because the entire purpose of creation is for God to be crowned as king. How is God crowned as king? How do we make God a home in this world? Through our mitzvahs. And that is specifically the theme of Tanya chapter 37. Now, before we get into the specifics of how the mitzvahs specifically bring about a home for God in this world, I'd just like to expand a few moments on the theme of klippa. You see, klippa is the language that Tanya uses to describe the forces that oppose godliness. So if our mission in this world is the purpose, then that which leads us away from that mission is called klippa. Anything which seduces us away from our purpose in this world, it's called klippa. Klippa translates as a peel or a shell. Why are the forces of impurity called a peel or a shell? Because just like a peel or a shell is not something bad. There's nothing evil about a banana peel. The problem with the banana peel is when you look at the banana peel, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to discard the peel and eat the fruit. But imagine if somebody discarded the fruit and ate the peel. You'd be dealing with a stomach ache. You'd be dealing with somebody who doesn't understand what they're supposed to be doing. Yet, as ridiculous as it sounds, the vast majority of humanity will eat the peel and discard the fruit. What I mean by that is, maybe not in the sense of a banana, but think about how we judge other people. Do you judge other people by the color of their skin or by the content of their character? We know that the vast majority of humanity is racist, and we do judge a book by its cover. Whites, blacks, people of all religion, we all judge other people by their first impression. It's a scientific fact that we all judge other people by the first 3 or 7 seconds in which we see them. We look them up, we look them down, we judge them by the car they drive, by the clothing that they're wearing, by their gait, by all these external things. We spend very little time judging the content of their character. We make first impressions based upon literally the color of their skin, by their exterior shell, right? And it's that shallow perception of other human beings which is expressive of our shallow perception of reality. Klippa thus represents a shallow perception of reality, as opposed to looking deeply into something and dealing with its ultimate purpose. If you get caught up in the shallow distraction of something, you're getting caught up in its klippa. Now, why did God allow this diversion, this mirage that confuses us? Should we judge the content of the character, or should we judge by the color of the skin? God allows us to be short-sighted in order to allow us to have the freedom of choice. If we were truly intelligent beings who were not drawn to instant gratification, to external appeal, then we would go to the heart and soul of everything that we engaged with. We wouldn't have freedom of choice. The purpose of everything is to make it holy, right? Is to use it in the service of God, to use it as to utilize it as to make it part of the home for God in this physical world. But if we were not lost in the externality, in the appeal, in the shell, in the first impression of everything that we see, we wouldn't have freedom of choice. This is the ability of seeing the trees and losing sight of the forest. This is why klippa means appeal. It's not inherently evil. It just hides the fruit within. Now, the peel serves a very important purpose. It actually protects the fruit. It's important. The peel protects the fruit. The problem is, if all that you see is the peel and not the fruit, you've completely lost the point, right? When you see money, what do you see? You see an item which is supposed to be used for a mitzvah. You see something which can serve your self-gratification. If it's the latter, you're getting lost in the externality. If it's the former, You're seeing through the peel, and you're seeing the fruit that's being protected within the peel, right? And it's up to our rational minds to decide how we're going to utilize every object that we engage with, or every human that we encounter. Are we going to use them for the peel, or are we going to use them for the fruit inside? Okay, hi, Jose Guzman from New York City. Meet you. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Now that we understand how the peel works, I want to just introduce you to two kinds of peels. So there's two kinds of peels. By the way, when it comes to your relationship with your spouse, just to give it a very practical example, you can have a deep, meaningful relationship with your spouse, or you can have a shallow and external relationship with her or him. If your relationship with your spouse is one which is of deep love, that's great. Then you see each other for who you really are. But some people relate to their spouses for external trappings. They're attracted to their spouses for external trappings. Oh, I'm married to him because he's an NFL football star. And the moment the guy breaks his leg and he's kicked out of the team, now the marriage is over, it's dissolved. Or you love her because she's a supermodel beauty queen, and the moment that she gets a pimple on her nose, the marriage is over, right? I love him because he has a lot of money, right? I love her because of the way she makes me feel. These are all external klippa reasons for the relationship, which obviously lead us away from the true depth of the relationship, which is love and intimacy and oneness, right? You know, when it comes to naming our kids, my wife and I often have a conversation about certain kinds of names, and I'll say, oh, that name is not my kind of name, and my wife will always remind me that if you knew the person, it's probably her side of the family, if you knew the person about whom I want to name after, then the name would mean nothing to you. Then the name, you wouldn't even notice the name. It would be all about the character of the person we're naming after. And I love when she tells me that, because it always reminds me, don't get lost in the klippa of the name. Don't get lost in the anatomy of the name, of how it sounds. Remember the person behind the name. You know, when we have the good fortune of getting to know a person, then you automatically forget the color of their skin. You forget the way they look on the outside. You forget some peculiarities associated with their name, because you see right through it. You see right through the peel, and you're connecting with the essence of who they are. You know, there's that TV show. It's like an American Idol kind of show. I think it's called The Voice, where the judges don't see the people auditioning. I don't know how this works, but I'm pretty sure that they're facing the wrong direction, and only afterwards they get to see the person that was singing. First, they get to know you by the voice, so that you don't make any prejudice decisions based upon how the person looks, as opposed to the other shows where they first see the person and they hear them, and they almost make first impressions based upon external perception, and then they hear the voice, right? So it's an interesting approach to viewing the fruit without the peel. When you have that setup of the voice where you don't see the peel, you only hear the voice, you're being exposed to the person without getting distracted by how they look or appear or how they sound, you know, when they introduce themselves, right? So I'm sorry, what I was going with this is that there's two kinds of peels. So there's a peel of light. There's a peel of light called klippas noga, which is a peel that is really neutral. It's not there to conflict with the purpose within. It can be used either way. It can be used for holiness, or it can be used for unholiness. It's really neutral, and that's called a peel which is of light. It really means a transparent peel. The klippas noga means a transparent peel, which may be used in the service of the fruit, or may be used in defiance of the fruit. It can be used, you know, to judge a person based on their externality, or it can be used just, you know, for you know, once you get to know the person, once you get to know the content of their character. So that kind of peel is called the klippas noga. But then there's a very thick peel, which is not a transparent peel, but one that actually hides away the fruit. And that is one that defies and conflicts with that which is hidden within. And that represents the forces of impurity in this world, that which is actually prohibited, which cannot be elevated. It's not neutral. It's that those forces of those energies in this world, spiritual energies in this world, which cannot ever be elevated into holiness. For example, forbidden relationships. A forbidden relationship, an adulterous relationship, an incestuous relationship is one that cannot ever be sublimated. It cannot be made holy. It's not for us normal people to be able to engage with and make it holy, right? So it's a quick example of this, right? So let's say a banana. Let's talk about a banana in general. Is a banana holy or unholy? It's not. It's neither. It's neutral. If you use a banana to eat before davening, so that your davening is more inspired and more calm, and you're more relaxed, and you're able to focus more on the davening, and the banana becomes something which aided your divine service. But if the banana was used in order to satisfy your gluttonous cravings of avarice, you ate it without a blessing, you just ate it out of indulgence, not for any divine purpose, then you took that neutral energy and you schlepped it downwards. That's a klippas noga, it's a neutral energy, a neutral klippa, a neutral peel, which could be used, it's transparent. It could be used for good or it could be used for bad. But then you have like a forbidden relationship or maybe a forbidden food. Let's say meat and milk or let's say bacon. So bacon would be, as opposed to the banana, not something which may be used for holiness or unholiness. It's something which can only be used for unholiness. It's prohibited. There's nothing you can do about it. There's no way to elevate the bacon and to make it kosher. You can't make the bacon kosher. So that would be a representative of a peel of an energy, a spiritual energy, which is actually blocking the food inside, blocking the divine purpose. That's what you might call an opaque peel. So with that introduction, now we're able to understand what a mitzvah does. You see, when we do a mitzvah, we're using always a physical object which derives from the transparent klippa. You're using a physical object which is of neutral energy. Let's think about it. You're using, for your mezuzah, you're using parchment from a cow. A cow is transparent. A transparent energy. It could be used for holiness. It could be used for unholiness. Think about the breakfast that you had this morning, the cup of coffee. The cup of coffee you had this morning could have been used to inspire your focus on Torah study and on davening, or it could have been used to just satisfy your craving and self-indulgence, right? To satisfy your ego. So that coffee could have been used for holiness or unholiness. Think of money, right? If you think of money can be used for good or money can be used for bad. It all depends on how you want to use it. So because every single mitzvah that we do engages a physical object, what happens is that every time you use a physical object for a mitzvah, what you're doing is you're taking an object which is drawn from that transparent divine energy, that the transparent spiritual energy, what we call klippas noga, the transparent peel. And when used for a mitzvah, the object is exposed to pure godliness, right? Because the will of God is to do this mitzvah, right? To shake the lulav. The will of God is to eat the matzah. So when you take the flour, which is of neutral divine energy, of neutral spiritual energy, and you're using it in the service of God and the fulfillment of the will of God, what you're doing is that you're revealing the pure godliness within this physical object, within the flour of the matzah, or within the palm branch of the lulav, or the leather of the tefillin, or the wax of the Shabbos candles. By revealing godliness within this physical object, the shallow perception of klippa becomes irrelevant, and the deeper purpose becomes clear. It's like when you get to really know someone. You don't even notice the color of their skin anymore, or their physical appearance anymore. You don't notice their unusual name anymore because you're drawn to their essence. You know who they truly are. So too, when you use a physical object, a neutral physical object, for a mitzvah, you've now uncovered the divine purpose within that object, so that the peel, the externality of that object, is now perfectly aligned with its inner purpose, and it's no longer blocking it. And that's what you've done each and every time you've done a mitzvah. You've infused holiness within a physical object. You've infused divine purpose. You've revealed the divine intent, the divine purpose within that physical object, and you've made that physical object into a home for God. Remember the doctrine of Dira B'Tachtonim, the doctrine of making for God a home in this physical world, in this lowest of all spiritual worlds. This physical object that you've just used for a mitzvah is one where godliness is totally concealed. You look at a candle, there's no godliness apparent in the candle. But the moment that you use that candle for Shabbos candles, what you've done is that you revealed the will of God within the candle. You've now revealed the ultimate purpose of the candle. So that now the externality, the shallow perception of the candle is now perfectly aligned and in service of that ultimate purpose, which is to light up the Shabbos, to fulfill the will of God, which is to rest and to have light on Shabbos. So now what you've done is that you've elevated or sublimated an object which until this point was neutral, was hiding the divinity within it. Now you've revealed the divinity within that physical object. And that's effectively what we're achieving each and every single time that we do a mitzvah. What we're doing is that we're taking something which is spiritually neutral, where godliness is not revealed, not concealed, but not revealed. It's just not apparent. And when you use it for a mitzvah, you reveal the purpose for which this candle, this leather, this flower, this palm branch was created. Whatever physical object you use for a mitzvah, you've now revealed the divine purpose for which this physical object was created, and you've made a home for God in that specific item. Let's take a look at this extraordinary idea in the book of Tanya. I'm going to turn now to the Practical Tanya. If you have this book, we're going to be turning to chapter 37 at the very beginning of the chapter. If you don't have the book, I highly encourage you to purchase the book. You can buy it from the shul office at 561-624-2223. That's 561-624-2223. Or you can probably buy it online on Amazon. It's called The Practical Tanya by Kol Menachem Publishers. The editor is Chaim Miller. Okay, so let's take a look at this idea which we're learning about right now in the words of the Tanya. Throughout chapters 35 and 36, the Tanya, so I'm on page 408 in the Practical Tanya. Throughout chapters 35 and 36, the Tanya has attempted to offer us some comfort over our spiritual predicament. While we not be able to worship God with the emotional intensity and consistency of the tzaddik, we can achieve external mastery over our actions. And that, the Tanya has argued, is actually more important in the scheme of things. It is sacred action in the form of mitzvah observance which fulfills God's purpose in creation, making a home for God in the lowest realms. In this chapter, the Tanya continues to explore this theme in further depth. So whilst we may not be able to achieve self-mastery within our own spiritual struggles, as we've learned in chapters 1 through 25, whilst we might be destined to struggle for spiritual mastery our entire lives, nevertheless, don't get dejected by the fact that you have to have an inner struggle. The purpose is not your self-mastery. The purpose is whether or not you're achieving your intent in this world, which is the reason you were sent to this world, which is to make for God a home in this physical world. Let's expand this idea in the words of Tanya. Now, the fullest expression of this reality of a home for God in the lowest realms, the doctrine of Dira B'Tachtonim, is, as we've learned in chapter 36, in the time of the Messianic era and the revival of the dead. That's when it will come to be revealed, since at that time there will be a disclosure of the blessed infinite light within this physical world. In chapter 36, we learn that God's purpose in creating the world will only be completely fulfilled in the future, during the Messianic era. Yet we also learn that the future home for God in the lowest realms is not a phenomenon disconnected with our activity in the current era. It's not like the home for God that we build, that will happen with the coming of Mashiach is like a reward that we receive at the end of the exile. It's actually something which we actively are building each and every time we do a mitzvah. Rather, all the home that we're building for God is dependent on our mitzvah actions and our worship and prayer throughout the whole period of exile, which gradually and cumulatively neutralizes the forces of Klippa. Of course, all the mitzvahs performed since Sinai in the 14th century BCE contribute to this effect. But the Tanya points specifically to the worship of the whole period of exile beginning in the 1st century CE. For it is during this last exile, the past 2,000 years, that Klippa forces are at their strongest, and as a result, the neutralizing power of each mitzvah is also at its strongest. As we noted in the previous chapter, the Messianic era is classically perceived as a time of reward, a period of human benefit rather than divine satisfaction. Yet here, the Messianic era is framed in Tanya as a time when God's desires for creation are finally fulfilled, when God finally enters into his home. To help reconcile these two approaches, the Tanya now offers a novel insight into the sage's teaching. The reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah. Normally we feel that when it says in the Mishnah that the reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah, we say, okay, the reward for a mitzvah is another mitzvah. If you did one mitzvah, then God rewards you with giving you another mitzvah. But that's not how the Tanya understands this. The Tanya understands this to mean that the reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah. Mitzvah means connection, is the connection which is formed through that mitzvah. Is the intimacy with God which is formed each and every time we do a mitzvah. The connection with God, that itself is the reward of the mitzvah. Let's see. Because that which causes the reward for a mitzvah is that same mitzvah itself. The plain meaning of the reward for a mitzvah is a person that has done a mitzvah is orchestrated and assisted by heaven to do another one. In order that he should be rewarded for both, he should have an extra mitzvah. But that's not how Tanya explains it. However, the Tanya here offers a deeper explanation that we're not speaking of one mitzvah leading to another mitzvah, but we're talking about one single mitzvah. The reward for a mitzvah is nothing other than the spiritual result of performing it. When we do a mitzvah, we create a home for God in that object. We're connecting with God. Mitzvah means connection. So the reward of a mitzvah is the intimacy with God created through that mitzvah, because through performing a mitzvah, you pull down a disclosure of the blessed infinite light from above to below, so that the blessed infinite light becomes enmeshed in the physical fabric of this world. This reward is not something else given in exchange for performing the mitzvah, like being paid money for doing a job. Rather, the reward is you fulfilled the purpose of creation by causing the blessed infinite light to be disclosed in this physical world through your mitzvah. Each time we do a mitzvah, we are actively making for God a home in that physical object. And every mitzvah that every Jew fulfills over the generations is with each time we do it with another physical object, so that that physical object actually becomes saturated with godliness, with holiness, with its divine purpose. We've made that object into a home for God. Let's develop this theme in the words of the Tanya. It's what I've explained already orally, but I'm going to do it inside the words. Now we turn to the precise spiritual dynamics of the mitzvah. As we learned previously, a mitzvah brings about a home for God below because it causes God's light to be disclosed in a physical object. And in doing so, the mitzvah elevates the forces of klipas noga, of the transparent peel energy, which had previously ruled that object, bringing pleasure to God and I. In the words of the Tanya, and that disclosure of the blessed infinite light comes into an object which had initially been under the control of klipas noga, of the neutral spiritual energy, and the object had been receiving its energy from klipas noga. A mitzvah may only be performed as an object which receives its energy from klipas noga, the least potent form of klippa, which is capable of acting as a medium for God's presence to be disclosed. It's the neutral spiritual energy. It's like money or flour or palm branch, any physical object in this world which is permissible, which is not prohibited explicitly, may or may not be used for holiness. The Tanya now briefly provides some examples of suitable objects of klipas noga, of neutral energy, from the animal and plant kingdoms, as well as from non-living matter, which are sanctified each and every time we do a mitzvah. Klipas noga controls all ritually pure and kosher items with which the practical mitzvahs may be observed, such as in the animal kingdom, the parchment on which we write the tefillin, the mezuzah or Torah scroll. As our sages of blessed memory taught, only ritually pure species are fit for the work of heaven, and that which is permissible for your mouth, which means you can only use a kosher animal for your tefillin and mezuzahs and Torah scrolls. So the ox or the cow is a spiritually neutral object. When we use it for a mitzvah, we've turned that neutral object into something which is sublimated and sanctified with the presence of God and the will of God. The same is true of the plant kingdom, for example. You may use an etrog, a citron, for a mitzvah, provided that it is not prohibited by biblical injunction. It's not within its first 3 years of the fruit of the tree, which is biblically prohibited. In the case, it's called orla. In which case, it's prohibited. The first 3 years of the fruit's life it's not kosher. So those would be the 3 opaque clippers. You know, the clipper that I talked about before, when you're not allowed to use something, when it's not spiritually neutral, it's spiritually prohibited. You can't use it, you can't sublimate it. But after 3 years, it moves out of the 3 impure clippers of the totally opaque peel, and it goes into a transparent peel, which is a neutral energy of divinity. I hope I'm not losing you here, guys. This is a bit of a subtle and abstract concept, but this is really as far as it goes in the subtlety and the abstractness over here. The idea that everything we use for a mitzvah is, until the point of the mitzvah, hiding godliness. And when you do the mitzvah with it, you're revealing godliness in that object. So what you're doing is that you're making the physical object, which until this moment was hiding God, you're making it into a home for God. And that's how we build for God a home in this physical world. Another example from non-living matter would be money, which is to be given to charity. Now, if the money was stolen money, then it's prohibited money, then it's impure money. It's money that you cannot use for a mitzvah. You cannot sublimate something which is prohibited, like stolen money. If you give stolen money to charity, it's not a mitzvah. Somebody asked me the other day, if you're eating bacon, do you make a blessing on bacon? I said, no, you don't make a blessing on bacon, because you cannot sublimate something which is prohibited. The purpose of the blessing before and after food is to sublimate and infuse holiness into that physical food. If you're eating something which cannot be elevated, cannot be incorporated into godliness because it opposes godliness, by the will of God it's prohibited. Therefore, it's not something which can become holy. You can't make for God a home in something which He doesn't want to dwell in. So if the money is stolen money, you can't use it for a mitzvah. But if it's not stolen money, then it's neutral energy, and it can be used for holiness. It can be used for the opposite as well. But when you choose to use the money which is permissible for a mitzvah, you've now sublimated the neutral energy. You've sublimated the klipas noga, the transparent klippa. The Tanya now describes what happens spiritually when a mitzvah is performed with a klipas noga object, or the spiritually neutral object. And now when you take one of these klipas noga objects and you use them to carry out God's mitzvah, which is His will, what happens is that the object's energy is elevated, its sense of separateness from God is voided, and it is fully absorbed into the blessed infinite light. And the disclosure of the blessed infinite light here is nothing other than God's will, as it is expressed in the mitzvahs. A mitzvah is the will of God. Since you use the physical object for a mitzvah, you've revealed the will of God in that physical object. Since, as we've learned in the divine will expressed within the mitzvahs, there is no hiding God's face at all that would conceal His light. And that, my friends, is this idea which I wanted to introduce to you today. I just want to wrap it up, because I hope I didn't lose you in the subtlety here of the klipas noga. Klipas noga is a word which I would love to have you introduce into your lexicon. Let me just expand a little bit on this idea in ordinary layman's terms. Klippa basically means anything which is neither holy nor unholy. If it's holy, we know what it is. It's holy. If it's unholy, we have a word for that. It's called treif. It's treif. We know the bacon is treif. The incest and adultery is treif. Lashon hara is treif. Lashon hara is evil talk. You cannot speak badly about someone. You can't do a mitzvah through a sin, right? So you can't honor the Shabbos through eating bacon. You cannot give charity through stolen money. And you cannot do a mitzvah through speaking badly about another human being. It's treif. So another word let's see. But what about everything else in between, which is neither holy nor treif? If it's in between, it's called klippa. Klippa, which means appeal. The question is, how are you going to use the neutral things of this world? Now, the vast majority of things in this world are neutral. Food, drink, money, marriage, just about all physical objects that are not explicitly prohibited in the Torah are neutral. They're spiritually neutral. When we use them for a mitzvah, we've made them holy. When we use them for a sin, God forbid, we've schlepped them down. That's why they call transparent energy, transparent peel. It could be used for a shallow. It could be used, for shallowness, which defies its deeper purpose, or it could be used in service of its deeper purpose. The peel can be used to serve the fruit, to protect the fruit, or the peel can be used for you to forget about the fruit. It all depends on how you use it. And that's the word which I'd like to encourage you to introduce into your lexicon. The word is klippa. To realize, if it's holy, it's holy. If it's treif, it's treif. But if it's neutral, it's klippa. And you have to ask yourself, this is klippa, how am I going to be using this klippa? It's a peel. Am I remembering that the purpose of the peel is only to serve the fruit? That the purpose of the neutral physical objects in this world is in order to fulfill the will of God? Or am I using the peel in and of itself? Am I eating the peel and throwing out the banana? The very name klippa reminds us that it's there to serve what lies inside of it. When you're able to incorporate this word into your lexicon, the word klippa, you can almost remind yourself each and every time you say the word, am I using this for the purpose for which it was created or not? Am I eating the banana peel? Or am I using it to protect the fruit? There's a great question in Breshit. I see Rob Berger's writing a comment here. Just before I get to your comment, Rob, but Rob loves to remind me the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. When they ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and God was looking for them, what did God say to them? One word. He said, Ayeka. He said, Ayeka, where are you? Did God not know where they were? Of course God knows where they were. God is God. He's almighty. He's all-knowing. God knew exactly where they were. Why did God ask, Ayeka, where are you? Not that God should know where you are. It's because I know where you are, says God. The question is, do you know where you are? Do you, Adam and Eve, do you know where you are? Do you know what you're here for? Do you know what you're supposed to be doing? This is actually the story that happened with the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, when he was put into jail when he was accused of treason, supporting the Turks, when really he was supporting the Jewish community in Israel. The Russians threw him into jail, and one of the Russian ministers came in and asked him this question: why did God ask Adam and Eve, Ayeka, where are you? Did God not know where they were? And the Alter Rebbe said, the answer of Rashi, he said, God was just doing a conversation opener. He didn't want to scare them. And the Russian minister said, I know the answer of Rashi, but I want your answer. To which the Alter Rebbe said, when a person reaches 55 years old and 6 months and 12 days and 2 hours and 7 minutes, God asks him, where are you? Where are you in the fulfilling of your purpose in this world? And the Russian minister fell faint because that was exactly his age. Whatever date that the Alter Rebbe had given, the 55 years and 6 months, was exactly his age, as he realized that the Alter Rebbe was saying to him, God is asking you, Mr. Government Minister, are you fulfilling your purpose in this world, or are you neglecting it? So that question, Ayeka, haunts each and every one of us. It's a question we have to ask ourselves each and every day. Where am I? Where am I? God knows where am I. The question is, do I know where am I? Am I fulfilling my purpose in this world, or am I getting stuck in a shallow perception of reality? Am I busy eating banana peels instead of eating the fruit? Am I judging people by the color of their skin or by the content of their character? Am I relating to the people in my life by what they can do for me, or rather by what I can do for them? Am I fulfilling my purpose in this world, or am I getting stuck in external trappings and what meets the eye? Am I living a one-dimensional or a four-dimensional life? And that's why I ask you to incorporate the word klippa into your lexicon. Klippa means appeal. How am I using the neutral things of this world that are all klippa? Money is klippa, cell phones are klippa, your car is klippa. Is my car serving God or not? Somebody told me the other day he has 2 cars. He says the BMW is Shabbat observant, but the Volvo, not yet. And I loved it because the way he said that was that my cars are also serving God. One of them is already serving God, the other one's working on it. He recognized that the neutral energy in his home, the car, was a work in process when it comes to its relationship with God. And as we build our home for God in this world, as we fulfill our purpose in creation, each and every single time that we do a mitzvah, what we're doing is taking a physical object, breaking through the shallow perception of it, breaking through the selfish use of it, and going straight to its ultimate purpose, using it for a mitzvah in collaboration with the will of God. And that's how we go through our lives, sanctifying everything we touch. Literally everything we touch turns to light. That is the role of a Jew in this world. Wherever you are, do a mitzvah. Whatever comes your way, use it for a mitzvah. By the way, that's why we have 613 mitzvahs. Not because God is trying to give us a lot of rules, but because God is giving us a lot of opportunities to sanctify the physical objects of this world. Whereas in other religions, they try to shun this world. They try to go as far away as possible from this world. Remember, the Muslims, they don't drink wine. The Christian priests, they don't get married. The priests of the Far Eastern religions, they have vows of abstinence and vows of silence and all sorts of stuff like that. But in Judaism, we're like, no. The Judaism is not about abstention, it's about engagement. It's about having children, it's about having sexual relations, it's about eating food every day. It's about making sure that you're dressed well and you live well, so that we realize that the physical components of this world are not in conflict with God, but on the contrary, are being used to create a home for God. The physical world is not in conflict with God. On the contrary, it's waiting for us human beings to uncover its purpose, to break through the peel, to break through the shallow perception, to break through the initial perception of this physical world and the physical objects in our lives, and use them for their ultimate hidden purpose, which is a home for God. So Rob, to your question, if an evil person can be transformed, then why can't an inanimate object be transformed into holy? I disagree with your premise. Of course, that an inanimate object can be transformed into holy. It does become holy. When you take money and you use it to give tzedakah, then that money becomes holy. In fact, not only does the money that you gave to tzedakah become holy, but all of your bank account becomes holy, because when you gave 10% minimum or 20% maximum to charity, the way that you calculated your mandatory obligation is between 10 and 20% was based on the 100%, which now means that the 100% of your bank account, which is all inanimate, has now become holy. Your entire bank account is now sanctified because of the charity that you gave. So an evil person can be transformed into holy, and an inanimate object also can be transformed into holy. What cannot be transformed into holy is an inanimate object, or even an animate object, which God has explicitly prohibited. For example, bacon, food that is treif, relationships that are prohibited. Anything which defies the will of God is essentially treif and cannot be sanctified. I hope that answers your question. Oh, but I said not stolen money. So now, what's stolen money? So money in and of itself can become holy. But stolen money means money that is in defiance of the will of God. So the money was procured by violating the will of God. Think of it this way, Rob. Can somebody give you, imagine you have somebody working for you. And let's say your secretary does a task that you want her to do for you, but she did so by explicitly violating your intent. Let's say she did so by deeply insulting your best client, but she got you the piece of paper that you wanted. How would you feel about that? You'd be like, thank you for the piece of paper, but you got it in a way which violates my will. I'm not happy about this. I'm actually furious about this. Right? Same thing with God. When we give God what he wants, which is a mitzvah of tzedakah, but you did it by spitting God in the face, by defying him, by stealing the money, that's not anything which is going to give God naches, or making God want to dwell in that physical object. God says, I do not want to dwell in something which is defying my will. And that's why you cannot sanctify something which is prohibited. In fact, we learned earlier in Tanya, many chapters ago, I think it was chapter 6, that the word prohibited in Hebrew actually means prisoner. Why is it called a prisoner? Because it's something which cannot be elevated, something which cannot be sanctified. Whereas something permissible in Hebrew is the opposite of a prisoner, is free. So permissible means free, prohibited means prisoner. What is the context of prisoner? That which can be sublimated, that which can be made into a home for God, is called permissible. It's free. That which cannot be made into a home for God, it's prisoner. It's bound in the forces opposing godliness. That is why it's called prohibited. It's prohibited because God doesn't want to dwell there. And I hope that answers your question. So this, my friends, is the very beginning of a very, very powerful chapter, which explains to us the doctrine of making for God a home in this physical world. How do we do this? By doing a mitzvah. Now, there's much more depth and breadth to this idea, which we'll be expanding next week, God willing. But for right now, I'm gonna conclude the class over here by saying that at least we have a lot to think about right now, thinking about this idea that the physical objects that we use for a mitzvah are being sanctified, or being redeemed from their state of being in klippa, in neutral energy, and are being elevated to being incorporated within godliness through using them for the will of God. And that is something that happens each and every time that we do a mitzvah. We're exposing it to the will of God, to pure godliness, and the shallow perception of that object now becomes transparent, becomes irrelevant in light of its newly exposed true purpose. And that is how we build for God a home in this physical world. I'm going to conclude it over here, friends. Today's Tuesday at 11:30 today. Corey's going to be giving a class on Zoom. That's Hebrew reading and Psalms of King David. That's at 11:30 today on Zoom. And with that, I'm going to call it a day. Thank you very much, everybody. Don't forget, we do have daily morning minyan here at the Chabad at 7:30 a.m. We're trying to rebuild our momentum that we had before the quarantine, before the pandemic began. We do have masks and social distancing here at the shul, and we'd love to rebuild the minyan. If you could join us in the morning, that would be really tremendous. Really, really tremendous to be able to build that minyan and have our minyan in the morning, even though we also are live streaming the morning minyans on Zoom. It would be lovely to be able to read the Torah and to have all the power of the minyan that we do in our daily minyan. If you could join us in the morning at 7:30, that would really be tremendous. And we know it's not perfect. Davening with a mask is not anybody's cup of tea, but it's what we have to do to make things work under current environment. Andy, to your point, Matir Asurim, can you explain the double meaning? Absolutely. So Matir Asurim is a blessing that we make every morning when we wake up. It's one of the morning blessings as soon as we wake up. On a literal meaning, it means that God unshackles the bound. You know, when you're sleeping, you're like in a fetal position, you can't move. And when you wake up, you're able to stretch your limbs, and we thank God for that. But on a deeper level, Matir Asurim will be he who releases those who are imprisoned, in this case, we cannot release, if it's talking about the forces of impurity that are prohibited, we cannot release those forces. But in the context of what we learned today, in the context of the transparent clip of the neutral spiritual energies, which is all the objects of this world that are neither treif nor holy, those are able to be elevated, sublimated, sanctified when we use them for a mitzvah. So that is how I would explain Matir Asurim, who releases the bound. But something which is truly bound, we cannot do that in the context of a mitzvah. That's actually the service of tzaddikim, of the righteous. That is what they can do. By the way, you know, the Tanya is a book of Beinonim, the book of the intermediary Jew, the book of the Jew who struggles his entire life for self-mastery. But there was another book that the Alter Rebbe wrote called the Book of Tzaddikim. That book apparently was burned. We've lost it. We have no copy of it. And that apparently was the theme of what the Book of Tzaddikim was, is how they can sanctify even that which is absolutely prohibited in this world, not anything which we can relate to. And yes, and the Messianic times is probably where that would be revealed and potentially released and sublimated. With that, friends, I'm going to call it a day here. Thank you for joining me here this morning for Tanya. I hope to see you again tomorrow morning. Again, if today's class was a little deep, maybe you want to listen to it again, you might want to review it, or send me an email to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. It's a little esoteric, this idea of klippa, but don't get lost in the weeds here. Just remember, there's neutral energy, and when we do a mitzvah, we sanctify it, we infuse it with holiness. That's pretty easy to understand, and that's how we make for God a home in this world. Thank you for joining me here today. Shalom, and have a great day.